Well, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Carrie. It's great to be here. I was planning to camp with you, but I had a family situation back east, and I wasn't able to get back in time to set my trailer up, which is why I'm not out there with you. But in any case, what I want to talk with you about today is just a couple things relating to naturally forming orbs and ball lightning. And I want to just cover three main points, and we can direct questions towards this at the end. Not everything in the sky that glows is a structured craft. That's one point. There's a continuum between natural ball lightning orbs and laboratory produced orbs and ball lightning, which seem to be the same thing. And because they can be produced in a lab and with technology, it means there may be third parties also directing some activity that looks like it's natural. So this is rather a complex topic. I've been studying ball lightning for about 3 years now, ever since I came across the work of Bob Grenier and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, which is a US registered nonprofit, but they're based in Europe. And they were looking at a lot of interesting phenomena related to cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, which transitions to ball lightning, micro ball lightning. And their work explained to me a lot of mysteries I had seen ever since I got involved with the topic of remote viewing, crop circles, UFOs, and all related paranormal phenomena. I began to see some patterns here, and a lot of what seemed to be mysterious before and without a scientific basis, all of a sudden I could see there was a scientific framework going back to Nikola Tesla and 100 years before. It's just for some reason you and I didn't hear about this research tradition. It went off into a certain technological, bureaucratic-based science research institutions, which for some reason, and we can all talk about this for the rest of the weekend, never really wanted to share this information. So we only heard a little part of the picture, but as I'm about to show you, there are several hundred years of research into orbs, ball lightning, anomalous energy, anomalous magnetism, animal deaths, human deaths, that for some reason never made it to the forefront of our discussion here in the US, which is why we need presentations like this and more work from the MFMP to kind of uncover all these missing threads. Because my background, by the way, I will tell you, is as a sociologist, statistics teacher, social research methods. I am not an engineer, I'm not a physicist, so what I'm going to present to you is my understanding of the literature as a social scientist. We're going to do a review of the literature and show why there's a history of injury to people and animals from electrical sources in the atmosphere, from the ground, that I have never seen this presented at conferences very much, and I've been going to them ever since 1996, when I got involved with RV, and my first UFO conference was in the Denver area. And I began to see there were all these threads, but it didn't really all come together for me until the past few years, so this we're going to look at here. And just, if none of this makes sense, there's a lot of information, ask some questions at the end, okay? All right, so let's look at the evidence. Let's look at ball lightning. Where does it come from? What is it? What do we know about it? Ball lightning is similar to what we call an aerogel. You might have seen pictures of this before. This was discovered during NASA's space missions. It's something that is the density of a gas but has the solidity of a liquid or solid. If you want to start wrapping your mind around paradoxes, just think aerogels. They're completely accepted in modern science. Ball lightning is like this because it's extremely light. It seems like a gas, but witnesses reported bouncing along on the ground, pushing things, pulling things, and so forth. There are reports about ball lightning since 1838. Think of it as a free-floating fireball, okay? Elvis Presley, great balls of fire. He was onto this. Okay. Here are some pictures from woodcuts and prints in the 1800s about ball lightning coming into people's homes. They come down chimneys. You might have heard about this. They can come right through open windows. They can come through glass windows. They can come through outlets. They can come out of TVs. Ball lightning is sort of like I can do anything type of entity. It can come just from about anywhere. Some of types can go right through glass and not even be phased at all. One of the earliest reports we have is from Professor Richman in St. Petersburg that was doing experiments based on the research of Benjamin Franklin, and is allegedly, he was killed by a fireball, a ball lightning that came out of a stroke of lightning. Now, even Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding persons of our country, had an interest in lightning, as you know. But you may not have heard what he was interested in is why does some types of lightning melt swords, metal swords, but not burn the leather scabbards that they're in? If it's just pure energy, why is it selective? We're going to answer those questions right here. Modern pictures of ball lightning show it in every possible context. Here's a picture from researcher Nikitin in Russia, who had a photograph of one line on the snow. There are reports of ball lightning emitting sulfur-like odors, which, as you know, is often accompanies pretty much anything that we call paranormal. You have the smell of sulfur. Ball lightning, this is a report from France. Ball lightning can create these sulfur-like smells. Sometimes it's seen at the end of a lightning strike. There's different points of view whether it precedes the linear lightning or is a consequence of it. It appears in many different contexts. Here's some ball lightning along a railway track. Ball lightning can also occur naturally in big old open spaces. Browns Mountain, North Carolina, you can see a photo of that here. I once was just sitting somewhere in Boulder, where I currently live. I was just telling the person about what I did, and they said Browns Mountain. That's how I found out about it. This is sort of a theme in this research, is you find out about a lot of it from other people. It's not in official literature. Part of the reason for that is it's considered a controversial topic, so people in universities generally don't study this because it's not considered career enhancing. This will probably apply in the government as well. So you learn a lot about this just talking to other folks from those areas. In fact, just driving down here, I stopped at the Bailey Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey. I was talking to Laurie at the counter. I told her about the conference here where I was going. She said, I've seen ball lightning in the tobacco fields of Kentucky. I was out there with some friends, Western Kentucky. There it goes zipping across the tobacco, leaves the crop there. She pointed out to her friends, oh, we see that all the time. Has anyone ever told you about the ball lightning in Western Kentucky? No, because people sort of keep these accounts to themselves because it's considered a little weird, and that gets into what sociologists like myself study, which is fear of ridicule, ostracism, and all the reasons that people don't share their experiences. We call them in sociology hidden events. In any case, other locations include Norfolk, Texas, Australian outback, and probably many other locations. Of course, Nikola Tesla produced these in his lab right here in Colorado at Colorado Springs. And if you go down to Colorado Springs to one of the parks in the center of the city, there's still a memorial to where Tesla had his little research building there, right down in Colorado Springs. He also was it Durango?
Victor and Cripple Creek.
Yeah, he had several locations. He apparently wanted a dry location to do his research, and he was out here for quite a while. Other people have reproduced Tesla's results with smaller equipment. David Boutillier in Canada has reproduced using Tesla's written instructions, has reproduced it in a lab form, little ball lightnings coming off his plasma streamers. So to understand ball lightning, we need to look at the different states of matter. We're all familiar with the 3 states of matter we learned about in high school science classes. This is solid, objects, liquid, gases, right? Then there are also plasmas. Plasmas are lightning and aurora borealis and nebulas and all the gas clouds out there. 99.9% of the universe is plasmas, as far as I can understand. But if you want to read this book, you can learn more about it. Fluorescent bulbs are plasmas. But there's a 5th state of matter, and that's what we call coherent matter. It's self-contained plasmas. Plasmas that have their own magnetic confinement field, so they look like an orb or a torus type shape or donut shaped or something like this. And focused plasmas are also called Bose-Einstein condensates. They're reproducible at room temperature. The Bose-Einstein condensate was predicted by Bose and Einstein back, I believe, in the 30s based on Einstein's relativistic equations and relationship between energy and mass. But it wasn't verified until 1995 right here in Colorado at the University of Colorado at the NIST lab there. So in 1995, the Bose-Einstein condensate, what we call BECS, is empirically verified. That is at ultra cold temperatures right above absolute zero, where particles give up their individual identity and, just like quantum mechanics tells us, become a wave. The particles become just one waveform. They collapse into a waveform, and that's a Bose-Einstein condensate. Since that time, it's been reproduced at much higher temperatures, and I just happened to be sitting in a coffee shop one day when I encountered Chia Chen, one of the world experts on the Bose-Einstein condensates, who taught NIST how to keep it going continuously rather than pulsed, which is a lot more similar to what we see with ball lightning. Ball lightning research over the years, as you can see, formal research starts in 1859. All these different names, I didn't hear about these until no one taught this to me in science classes in university anywhere. You know, Arago, Brand, McNally, you can see all these folks, Stakhanov, mostly European names, some Japanese researchers, mostly Russian. Eagly, who's a Hungarian researcher. You can see there's many, many different cases that have been analyzed ever since 1859. Again, after the death of Professor Richmond, people were a little afraid of ball lightning, which partly, again, inhibited the research. This is a highly fragmented field. Researchers from all over the world have had different research paths here, so this is another reason why we don't know very much about this, even though there have been some ball lightning conferences. One of the researchers in our country was Ken Shoulders, who worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff at SRI. Ken also worked for the NSA in microelectronic structures, and he called ball lightning black organizations with ghostly properties. How does that sound to you? Because ball lightning literally does everything that's the inverse of our ordinary experience of reality. It creates cold electricity. It has an invisible form called black ball lightning, right? It can create electronic failure, short circuits, power surges, remote communications, magnetization of non-magnetic materials, including wood. You've heard about this at these cases where you study where there are magnetized materials that should not be magnetic. Aports, things just coming out of nowhere, solid objects. Dark matter, and UFOs. This is all from the work of Ken Shoulders, another person you never heard of before. So Ken Shoulders is a big figure within our own history. Recently, he passed away, I think, about 15 years ago or so. He worked with ball lightning in a micro scale in a laboratory, and he was able to recreate it. He called it exotic vacuum objects. That was his final name for it, EVOs. And that's our term for ball lightning nowadays. Ball lightning has been known to have dangers for quite a long time. This researcher, Anatoly Nikitin, observed in just one paper, and you can look this up if you're interested later, it's all available online, that it can cause injury, it can cause death, it can cause instant blood heating and evaporation of blood, it can cause muscle rupture. There's evidence that it can cause radioactivity, X-rays. So this isn't something that you want to have come to you necessarily and go through your body. It's only dangerous when it's really close, okay? But you've heard about cases like this at Skinwalker Ranch and other places where there seems to be microwave damage and radiation. So this is a form of electromagnetic radiation from the ball lightning. Here's one case that Nickenden talks about where someone just goes into their garage and they encounter a ball lightning and they try to move away from it, and it moves through their body, goes to their legs, and leaves 2 holes. How often have you heard of 2 holes being found? Okay, here we have evidence of it occurring right from ball lightning and from, again, boiling of blood, hello, exsanguination, high frequency radiation. So you can see that ball lightning is very powerful and potentially dangerous and potentially lethal. Here's a case where it vaporized a gold chain off of someone's neck in Russia. This person, I was reading about this episode again, I believed it happened near a beach. The person wasn't terribly injured by the ball lightning, but his necklace instantly vaporized, leaving these black marks. We're talking instantaneous vaporization of metal. Ball lightning has this ability to keep its form as it grows and it gets smaller, but it sort of keeps its overall shape at different scales. One of the researchers in our own history, again, you wouldn't have heard about this because it's funded by Department of Energy and classified programs, is Winston Bostick. Winston Bostick in the 1950s was hired by DOE with the intent to create peaceful uses of fusion power. This is right after World War II. We've developed atomic weapons, hydrogen bombs, and the DOE says, is there a way to use this to power the electrical grid? They hire Winston Bostick with Project Sherwood. And what I'm attempting to show you is there's a classified line of history in classified programs from DOE, from DOD, which is why this doesn't generally tend to be public knowledge, because these people get older and they die and we never hear about the full story of what they were doing. But we do know that Winston Bostick and other researchers that he worked with were able to create something that's very similar to ball lightning in a lab. The New York Times wrote an article about it called Galaxies in a Test Tube. But if you look at the shapes here, just pay attention to some of these shapes that Bostick was able to recreate in a laboratory. They could look like pinwheel shapes. They could look like this sort of spiraling types of shapes. Again, this is all funded by the US government. And Bostick was active until the 80s. This is, again, a type of coherent matter. There are different ways of creating these ball lightnings, whether it's the way that Tesla did it with these disruptive discharge tubes colliding a lot of electrons together. Bostick did it with magnetic fields. But it's all different ways of creating coherent matter. This is more recent research from MFMP. You can see similar types of structures. The Vega experiments right in a laboratory setting. More of the EVOs that Ken Scholder was interested in. Ball lightning, when it goes through a material, will leave these strange tracks. Strange tracks. This is literally what it's called. You've heard about strange tracks around animal mutilations and cryptids and so forth. Imagine my surprise when I'm doing this research, and what do they call it again? Strange tracks. It creates these vortex-like patterns in solid materials. And this is from the work of Dr. Takeaki Matsumoto, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year after producing decades of this research. His research was banned in the US by Fusion Technology magazine because they put a moratorium on ball lightning research. So this is why we didn't hear about Matsumoto. This is his book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. It leaves these little weird tracks that you can see at the upper left, right? These sort of hopping marks, these sort of zigzags at a microscopic scale. I just want to show you that there's forensic evidence when ball lightning is present. This is not something that we can't go out and test. We'd be looking for strange tracks that look like weird little hopping marks, spiral shapes, and so forth. Even John Archibald Wheeler from Princeton created his own version of this. He called them geons, which are these arrangement of electric fields and magnetic distributions with an electric field that created gravitational effects too. And this again is very similar to the structure of ball lightning. Bob Greenyer was able to create this image representing what ball lightning looks like. It's fractal. It's rings within rings within rings. It's a fractal shape. Exotic vacuum objects have this structure, kind of a toroidal shape. Russian research that was discovered by a researcher, Zverbelis, he called it an electromagnetic phantom. He discovered a KGB experiment in a Moscow basement that looked like a torus shaped, but if you can imagine, it's rings of wire and then more rings around those rings, kind of like what you see on the right here. He called it a bagel. He wrote this article called The Bagel Game. It produced ball lightning that would last in that room for 2 days once the plug was unplugged. So you would create this ball lightning. It was invisible ball lightning, but you could detect it with a magnetometer, but it persisted. It would last for 2 days. You remove the equipment and it was still floating over the lab table. This is the sort of schematic diagram that he came up with, another Russian mathematician, Nevesky, which is a modified version of Maxwell's equations. The type of Maxwell's equations, and you know James Clerk Maxwell is the famous Scottish scientist that was able to mathematically understand Michael Faraday's discoveries about electromagnetism. It's the basis of our modern society nowadays with technology and magnetism and electronic devices, and back then motors in the 1800s. What Maxwell was working with were open pointing vectors where the magnetic field and the electric field are always at 90 degrees apart. And that's the basis of our motors and our technology. What Nevesky and Zverbelis discovered is that the KGB had invented closed pointing vectors where the electricity and the magnetism keep wrapping around themselves like smaller and smaller rings. In Zverbelis and Nevesky's point of view, all the way down to the quantum vacuum field. It was literally tapping into the quantum field. You've heard about this before, zero-point energy, tapping into the quantum vacuum. Well, it's not a surprise that the Russians came up with this because they were ahead of the US. Yes, it's really true in the 50s in electronics, according to my discussions with Dr. Halputov, which is why they had Sputnik. And we had the Sputnik moment where they had satellites and we didn't, because they were ahead in vacuum tube technology and they were ahead in this technology too. We're talking fractal toroidal shapes that tap in to the quantum vacuum. How cool is that? This is the structure of ball lightning. And this is why it's so powerful. Fractals are objects that are self-similar at different scales, and you see images. And it's in our bodies too, in our bronchial structure, cardiovascular system, branching structures, you know, like trees get smaller and smaller and more branches. That's fractals. So ball lightning has this fractal structure. And again, for myself personally, this is another interesting aspect of it. I study fractals in my graduate school days at WSU in sociology, just as sort of mathematical objects of other ways of sort of measuring information. And here, to my surprise, decades later, they come up again in ball lightning, the exact same fractals. So fractals weren't just pretty pictures in the structure of how nature works and satellite communication as it was used in the 90s. JPEG images are able to take a few pixels and reproduce the picture with fractals. They're also the basis of ball lightning and orbs. And this is the exact fractal that Zverbelis and Nevesky said was the basis of ball lightning and what they had seen in this Moscow basement, what Zverbelis had seen, the electromagnetic phantom. And they said this is the fundamental shape that fills all space-time. This is sort of the shape that defines our particular reality all the way down to the quantum scale. This is the exact same fractal I studied in graduate school, the Koch snowflake. I even discovered it in 1997 in the UK as a crop circle where it was 300 feet across. And there it is in the lower left, the Koch snowflake by Silbury Hill. In any case, there is some good science behind why this works. You guys often hear this phrase, well, there's no known science to explain it, so we're just going to move on. It's BS. There is science out there. Maybe you didn't want to look at it. Maybe it's in another country. Maybe it's in classified DOE or DOD programs, but it exists. So how does this connect to animal mutilations and modern interest in these other subjects? Well, I came across this book recently. It's an excellent book from 1966, Flying Saucer Serious Business by Frank Edwards. And to my surprise, just reading this book a couple weeks ago, Edwards talks about one of the earliest cases of animal mutilation that I've known about. It had to do with the airship wave in the 1890s. You've all heard about this wave of airships that was seen across the US in the 1890s. When I was filming with the History Channel in search of a couple of years ago down in Stephenville, Texas, with the Stephenville UFO sighting, we were in Dublin, and I got to talk to one of the historians in Dublin, Texas. There was an airship sighting there, I believe, in 1896, and he showed me the exact area. It was one of these mysterious airships. They were seen all over the US, and our technology in airships isn't known to have been developed enough at this time to explain how they could move all over the US at the time. And it actually exploded right over their mill. In this particular case, there was a Kansas airship in Roy, Kansas, and an individual by the name of Alexander Hamilton saw it picking up a cow with a red rope and hauling it into the airship. Okay? Airship technology at the time could really not go very far. And it certainly doesn't explain all these ships moving all over Texas in the same period of time. It's a mystery, and it's for another discussion about what sort of the objects these are, UFOs. The carcass was later found with only the hide, the legs, and the head. The rest of the carcass had been taken. According to Edwards, about 8 or 9 upstanding citizens from Roy, Kansas, including the sheriff, signed an affidavit that Mr. Hamilton was of good character, would not make this stuff up. So we believe this to be a true story and a very early case. There are probably earlier cases of animal mutilation. This is a movie that UFOs, Past, Present, and Future, which was commissioned by NASA and Edwards Air Force Base in California. It was produced by Robert Emenegger, and they had an extensive section on cow mutilations. This is sort of my introduction to the topic. This movie's produced in the early 70s. It's narrated by Rod Serling, who's interested in paranormal phenomena. It's filmed in the Pentagon, and it's a serious movie about UFOs. It's online. I suggest you watch it. It's one of the earliest UFO documentaries, and they don't laugh for a second here. They're not saying it's swamp gas. They're not saying it's flocks of geese or weather balloons or anything like that. They are saying this is a serious subject that the American public needs to get used to. Why they changed their mind and said we're not going to release the movie, they canceled it a few weeks before it's supposed to go into movie theaters. It goes through many good cases, and there's a whole section on animal mutilations. Let's hear what they had to say about it.
Yeah, we arranged with the Honeywell people in Denver to borrow a 1100 millimeter Lentar lens from them, and got some high-speed recording film from Kodak. And then we sat and we waited, hoping that the lights would come back and we'd have a chance. And finally that chance came. It was a stationary object that we saw for approximately 30 to 45 minutes, and the resulting shots were interesting, to say the least. But shortly after these final exposures, the object just disappeared. It was almost like somebody hit a light switch and it was there so long.
What are these unidentifiable lights? What is their nature and their purpose? Why have they appeared in the night skies immediately prior to the discovery of mutilated cattle? How many more animals will die before the mystery is solved?
Just looking at some of those photos, they're putting a UFO in there at the end. You didn't see a UFO in there. You saw a plasma, a plasmoid, ball lightning. They're turning it into a structured craft. Why are they doing that? I didn't see a structured craft there. In any case, some of the witnesses here are sheriff's department officials. This is from Colorado. It started with all the cases out in Colorado here in the 70s that Katie knows much more about than I do, and some of you know more about. But they would say, we can't make cuts like that, right, in the carcasses. In the Colorado Bureau of Investigation thought that there were predators involved, but other witnesses in this documentary disagree. This veterinarian said he couldn't understand how the blood had been removed, but he said the only way that we can do that is you'd have to restrain the animal, start removing the blood with a syringe, and the heart would pump the remaining blood to the extremities. So it's a pretty big mystery. Animals apparently don't approach the carcasses, lights in the sky at night, and so forth. There is an FBI site called vault.fbi.gov where you can search for some of this, and I'm looking through this. They talk about these mutilated cows here and in New Mexico, Colorado, and these are what some of the cuts look like that really puzzled everyone. They definitely don't look like a predator cut, do they? It's really sharp and really straight. You could see why people are confused by this. But if we look at the images, does this look like a structured craft to you, or more like a plasmoid, plasma, or ball lightning? I mean, to me, this looks like Earth lights, okay? And this is our evidence. We have to go on the evidence we understand. This looks exactly like what you would expect ball lightning to do. And I'll show you some examples from other parts of the world. Hessdalen, that looked identical to this, so I'm going with Earth lights over these carcasses, okay? But what was the interesting thing is at the end, they superimpose a UFO right onto that image. Now, why are they doing this? Is this a type of disinformation where they want us to believe it's UFOs? Well, they've done this before. I've spoken to retired Air Force OSI agent Richard Doty. You might have heard of him. He's on this show frequently that airs right now as we're giving this conference, Disclosure Tonight. I interviewed him down in Laughlin, Nevada in 2019 at the UFO MegaCon. You can see that on my YouTube channel. But what he said is he was paid by AFOSI at Kirtland Air Force Base to say that things were UFOs that were not. Okay, so the government has done this before. They have said things are UFOs when they are other types of objects. In this case, they were drones, early drones the Air Force had developed to patrol Kirtland Air Force Base, which is a nuclear storage bunker area. They don't want people knowing that they have these drones. So what do? They send out people like Rick, and this is what he told me. You can see it on the video that I interviewed him. Disclosure Tonight, he talks about this all the time, where they told people, oh, you saw a UFO. They hired actors who pretended to be UFO investigators to come to these people's homes to convince them these were UFOs. So the government has done this before where they have said things are UFOs that had other explanations, and I'm suggesting this could have happened with animal mutilations to some extent, but it remains to be researched. Now here's another surprise for me recently. This book, Secret History of Crop Circles. I was researching it a couple upcoming weeks for this conference. What percent of crop circles, it goes back about 100 years, what percent are related to UFO landings, UFO sightings, and other causes? And because as a researcher myself, I came across a lot of man-made circles in the UK, and I knew some of them were UFO made, but I really wanted to research it here. And here I come across 1967 Alamosa. Did you know there were crop circles found next to Skippy? Because it's right here in the book. As you can see, this is what we're told. There were ground markings located in the immediate vicinity, 15 circular exhaust marks, 6 holes measuring 2 inches across, 4 deep. That sounds like something landed. And crop circles whose number was not disclosed. One circle was 24 meters in diameter. That's about 75 feet. Katie said that she had seen something like this out in Elbert County. This is known to be one of the portal hotspots, just like Skinwalker Ranch. We'll talk about Marley Ranch a second in Missouri. Bradshaw Ranch in Sedona. And so Katie wants to know, is this ball lightning? Is it UFOs? We don't know exactly, but what I want to suggest to you is it could have multiple causes. I'm not here to say it's only ball lightning, because there is a continuum from ball lightning to UFOs, but it could be something related to these other states of matter that flattened the crop that had something to do with Skippy's death. I'm just bringing some more evidence here. But here it is in a book about crop circles. Don't you find that interesting? This is, I mean, I'm researching this for this conference, and boom, it's right here in the book. I was just looking for these UFO cases. UFOs have created crop circles, the smaller ones like you see in the center here. People make some of the bigger ones. I got to know those groups, and that's a whole nother story for another time. They all create weird electromagnetic effects, but it's interesting that you found it right next to, right in Snippy, the brush was pushed down. I talked to a researcher, a woman from North Idaho, Louise Vovez. It's on my website. In my book, Black Swan Ghosts, you can go to the website and watch my interview with her, but she said she saw a disc flatten the meadow up in Usk, Washington while they were picking huckleberries. I asked her how flat as a pancake, 90 degrees, just like this. So we have a witness who saw a disc, the falling leaf pattern, and she said a whistling sound, and it's gone, flattens the meadow in like 20, 30 feet across as it's leaving. Some other people in the area panic, and the military, they call sheriff, military comes up from Spokane, cordons the area off for about at least 10 days, and she and her brother were quite ticked off because they went back to try to pick more huckleberries, and the military has set up jeeps and tank traps. They literally dug these tank traps into the roads through this national forest to keep anyone from getting there. She said they're out there with Geiger counters. We've heard about radioactivity around these animal mutilations. So I'm just suggesting there's a connection here. And sometimes structured craft could be involved. They could be involved in making these circles. It's just some of the clues around Snippy's death that we would need to look at. So let's look at some more evidence. One of the best known researchers in ball lightning, V.L. Bichkov from Russia, and this is just one of his books, it's extensive cases. He's the one that talked about animal deaths and injuries, and humans also. He said in his books that ball lightning has been known to transport animals and people. Okay, literally move people and animals. We don't have a lot of specifics, but this is going back in the literature. He says there's no clear distinction between ball lightning and UFOs. And this is an atmospheric researcher who goes off into ball lightning and realizes there's a continuum between UFOs and ball lightning, which I cannot completely understand or clear up. It's just there. Some of it is naturally produced Earth lights, and some of it are these structured craft. And they can change. I'll get into that in a second. So from this perspective, animal mutilation could be caused by a type of natural electrocution, similar to what we know in human cases of spontaneous combustion. Some of these cases, because we have the smell of sulfur around some of these cases. We have the exsanguination, which we know is related to ball lightning, people having their blood boiled instantly. A ball lightning, when it's gone into bathtubs, has evaporated all the water, not through heat, through electromagnetism, like a microwave. Think of it like a microwave. It happens very quickly, and it causes tissues to evaporate, tissue just to disappear. Some of this goes back to Walter Brand's study from 1923. This was, I believe, German research. And he said right in there, ball lightning can transport animals and people, which could be responsible for missing people and missing animals. Ball lightning has been known to tow locomotives for up to an hour at the front of the cab. It can do different things because it's mercurial. It can take different forms and do lots of different things. Books written about this, Fiery Killer. I couldn't find a copy. This is a Russian book from Grigorchev, A.I. Grigorchev. 1990, only 7,000 copies printed, Fiery Killers, about ball lightning injuring people and animals. I wish we could get a copy of this book to see more about it. George Egli, Hungarian ball lightning researcher, talked about this in 1993. The energy potential of ball lightning is 10 times that of TNT, equivalent to a grapefruit-sized ball lightning is equivalent to 10 hand grenades. 10 megajoules. It's huge. It can do immense destruction. Here's the formula if you want to know how to compute the power of ball lightning. David Freiberger from Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, SLAC at Stanford, funded by DOE, looked at ball lightning extensively related to the Hessdalen lights. I'll show you some pictures of those in a second. He determined there were two ways that ball lightning ends. It either goes invisible or it explodes, depending on the energy configuration, as you can see from this chart. Sometimes ball lightning explodes at the end of its life form, apparently from Coulombic repulsion, this repulsion that we all heard about in high school physics classes between electrons. Okay, so the condensed matter gets very close together, but when that fades away, what's creating the charge clusters, the Coulombic force takes over and pushes things apart. Or it can disappear. For Freiberger, ball lightning is a type of electromagnetic toroidal vortex, just like this shape. He called this a vorton. He created another name for the fundamental charges that create these vortex shapes. So we're dealing with a vortex shape, okay? For real, electromagnetic vortex. And Freiberger believed this was responsible for the Hessdalen lights, which are similar to the other types of lights that we've seen here in the US. Earth lights, as they're called. Some people called them, I think Freiberger called them MLOs, mobilus luminous objects. The reason I'm showing this all to you is to show there is research about this from different sources, but it hasn't really been put together before, which makes it interesting. Earth lights, basically. People have said these Hessdalen lights were UFOs. I disagree. I mean, they're not UFOs in the sense of being structured craft with extraterrestrials in them. They're produced from the particular magnetic structure of that part of the world in Norway, closer to the North Pole, perhaps minerals in the soil. And this is what they look like. Very similar to what we saw from those Dulce pictures, right? From a few minutes ago from the UFOs That Has Begun documentary. The first name of that documentary, by the way, was UFOs That Has Begun. It was changed to Past, Present, and Future when they added the animal mutilation section in a couple of years later. So it has different shapes. It has a dark and invisible form that Freiberger talks about. And I would say that these Hessdalen lights are just part of the information here. This is not a structured UFO. These are Earth lights. They can do this. They can, because people out at Norway, if you looked at the research in Hessdalen, they would bring summer camps of kids out there all summer, and they'd be waiting with cameras, and they set up a ton of cameras there. Dorani and others researched this. And this is exactly the same energetic structure as ball lightning, as lab-produced ball lightning. It's all the same thing. And let's look, here I want to show you the FBI came out and did their own research. I want to show you a brief clip from Dave Paulides' 411 Missing premiere in Arizona a couple of years ago, the movie, The UFO Connection. He interviewed a former FBI agent, D'Souza, who was on the FBI's Strange Desk, studied all these phenomena, the real X-Files. Just listen to what D'Souza says about it.
So did you work mutilated cows?
I have, as an adjunct.
And what was your conclusion?
Our conclusion was that we couldn't stop them. We couldn't stop them. We would go there and consult with the security forces, the security teams that were trying to help these ranchers. And we would go to see what is it that they're doing. And no matter what they did, there was always, they set up, we had surveillances set up everywhere, all over these multi-huge properties, acreage, and we had all of these things, and there would always be, we would come back, look at all the CCTV, all the security, and there would always be a flash of light, and then all the mutilations would be done in a nanosecond, according to us. I mean, according to what we saw. So those cases there was no real result on those cases. we had to basically just walk away from those.
Nanosecond. Does that sound like little ETs coming down with scalpels? Not to me. It sounds more in the line of something that's really quick and gives off flashes of light. Just more evidence here, just presenting different points of view. It seems consistent with what we know from researcher Walter Brand, all the other European ball lightning researchers, that ball lightning can do this, or some variety of that. Then there's Marley Woods. You know, Ted Phillips, who was J. Allen Hynek's assistant from CUFOS in Chicago. Later on, he went on to do his own, he did all the trace case landing research for Hynek, right? Remember all those cases, Delphos, Kansas, and all these fascinating cases where there's ground markings. Ted Phillips was the guy on the ground. Thousands of cases, I believe. He went out to look at Marley Woods, a ranch in southern Missouri, and he encountered the same sort of phenomena. They called them ambers. But when you look at the photos of these, do they look similar or not to Hessdalen? To me, they do. Or Dulce. It looks to me like the same phenomena we're talking about here. And Phillips described in 2 videos that I can find on YouTube. Here's the Ozark Mountain UFO conferences. Maybe some of you have been there. Katie, were you ever there at that? And you were there too, right? So I never got a chance to see Ted Phillips in person, but the videos are there. And what he talks about is very similar to what we know about what ball lightning, the class of family of ball lightning can do. He described once how one of these ambers lifted up a picnic table on chains, and it's in the air moving as the orb goes over it. There was an unfortunate case where the rancher walks by one of their prize horses locked in a barn. He comes back a few minutes later, and it's in pieces on the walls. So good, there's no kids here at the moment. It blew up. But we know ball lightning can blow up in its final. And so this is one possible cause. And you're seeing all these ambers out there. The way Ted described it was so interesting. They would get in the car, try to go down to where these lights are. The guy way out here, a quarter mile, would say, yeah, you're right next to it. They couldn't see it. If someone from another angle could see it, they're right next to it. Invisible. So be careful out there. Marley, Phillips described calves stripped of flesh completely. There were only skeletons left many times, and a circular black char mark that the body is found within. Again, that's consistent with Earthlight's ball lightning and so forth. So what this means is not every glowing aerial object is a UFO. There's mobile luminous objects, there's Earthlights, there's ball lightning. But it's a little more complicated than that. Because you remember the Colares Island, Brazil cases that the Brazilian military investigated, that our own military helped them with. There were several hundred cases of people being injured by the Colares lights. They emitted blue beams. There were people killed by these objects and lights. There were animals killed. It's just called generally Colares Island, but it was a region in the island and in the Amazon. Some of these lights, and I saw this decades ago before I knew about ball lightning, look a lot, again, like what we saw over Dulce, right? Looks like the same thing to me, like what we see over Hessdalen, over Marley Woods. And yet the witnesses down there reported seeing structured craft. 2, they even reported seeing occupants. So I'm not here to tell you that this is all ball lightning and orbs. I'm just saying that there's a relationship here between these phenomena, and we need to do more research to understand what's going on here. This does not preclude other actors being involved or entities that can manipulate this in some way. John Ramirez, former CIA missile analyst who has been on various podcasts, called them stealth plasmas. Ramirez said that they would track, the CIA would track these UFOs coming into the Earth's atmosphere with their keyhole satellites. You can look these up, they're public knowledge now on Wikipedia. There were 12 or 13 of these satellites. The premier satellites at the time in the 70s that the US used to keep track of the atmosphere. He said they would see them come in, but they could turn to another form called stealth plasmas, where they turned into a plasma-like object, large. Now, Katie was asking before, could ball lightning have created something 75 feet across? That's pretty big for ball lightning. Ball lightning tends to be a couple inches to a few feet. It doesn't mean it can't do that, because sometimes it's been seen to be really huge. So we just don't know. But for the most part, sightings of ball lightning are on the smaller scale than that. It doesn't mean, though, that the energy of the electromagnetic vortex might not spread out, too. These are all just good research questions. We don't have the answers. So we have someone from the CIA who's been given permission to talk about this. He told them, if I say anything, just tell me not to keep talking so much, and they never called him. So we know that UFOs have a solid form, and they have a stealth plasma form, and invisible forms, too. So watch out. Shakparanov in Russia did this great lab work with Mobius strips, these strips that turn back on themselves. I never knew that M.C. Escher's idea of Mobius strips had a huge electromagnetic implication. But Shakparanov was able to generate both white and black ball lightning in the lab with his Mobius strip devices, generating ball lightning. On the left, you can see black ball lightning, what it looks like. Now, you remember one of these was seen out at Skinwalker Ranch, and it's in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. We now know that Axel Rod, I think, is Jay Stratton, head of UAP Task Force. And I talked to Jay at Phenomicon last year, just over in Vernal. And I asked him about these black ball lightnings, because he said there were three of us DIA folks, and some of them are battle hardened. And I remember walking out and we're seeing this dark thing, and it's generating fear. By the way, fear is one of the things that accompanies ball lightning for whatever reason. I asked Jay, do you think you saw black ball lightning? And his response was very good. He said, well, that's how your brain interprets it, but what is it really? Good response. Another reminder that what we're seeing may not literally be what it is. It's how your brain is interpreting it. In any case, what Shakparanov discovered is that their photos would often come out blurry of ball lightning. Blurry. How often have you heard that our photos of UFO and cryptids and ghosts and everything else, it's blurry, so if it's really real, how come it's not in focus? Well, you got this with cold fusion ball lightning experiments too, right here. The researchers saying our photos came out blurry. Why? Oscillating permittivity. Permittivity and permeability are the two constants that create the speed of light. And if one of them, the electrical constant or the magnetic constant, are oscillating, it's not, the speed of light's going to be fluctuating for real, and it's not going to seem solid and sharply defined. There are even witnesses to cryptids. You read cases of this where they said the creature looked blurry. It wasn't their photo. They're looking at it and it looks blurry. Okay, we have evidence of why things look blurry. So different people researchers who've created this lab-produced ball lightning. So the point is, it seems that what we can produce in the lab and what we see out in nature are very similar in many ways. This is the research of Bogdanovich, who was able to create these long-lived plasmoids, what he called them, EVOs, ball lightning, for 4 months. They were able to embed themselves in 4 months. For 4 months, you wouldn't even know they were there anymore. The ball lightning can embed itself in something and just wait around, and it can embed itself in skin. And you might not even know it's there because it's charge neutral. 2 Air Force studies about ball lightning, one from 1995 from J. Reese Roth, where he said that 1 out of 20 Americans had seen ball lightning. And this is why when you go around like I did and meet someone yesterday in Bailey to start talking about people have seen this. I've seen it a couple times in the UK around the crop circles. One was a small blue grapefruit shape, lasted a few seconds. The other person next to me, I thought I might be seeing things. He said we both saw it. It was on the ground. It looked sort of like a flame coming out of the ground. I didn't know about ball lightning at the time. It looked like someone had ignited a propane flame, but there was no burn marks. It was ball lightning. And I saw an orb below a cloud there a couple years later. So this is a very interesting study from Air Force funded, where they estimate the power of ball lightning and what we know about it. And this paper is worth reading if this subject interests you. Just about the structure of ball lightning and how much power it has. What I didn't know was that ball lightning was seen in World War II on US subs near the electrical generators. They saw these orbs coming out of the generators, and people have attempted to reproduce it. We're not quite sure if they completely reproduced what was seen on American subs, but this is part of our American history here, is World War II, submarines, and ball lightning seen right in the subs. So you want to watch out with it because it can short things out pretty quick. But here's the interesting paper, and this is sort of the last few slides before we go to questions. I know this is a lot of information, believe me. This is from three or more years of intensive research. There's the Eric Davis ball lightning research study. You might have heard of Eric Davis with the Davis-Wilson notes, those notes that were discovered in Edgar Mitchell's belongings after he passed away, of allegedly a secret conversation between Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson in the back of a limo in Las Vegas. Well, Eric Davis did this study from ball lightning for the Air Force to, again, try to understand what it is, and of course, see if you could do something useful with it. And this is from AFRL in Wright-Patterson, Ohio. And he mentions masers, atmospheric masers, being related to ball lightning. In other words, ball lightning can trigger masers. Masers are a precursor to lasers. You know how focused lasers can be. Laser being light, amplitude, stimulated emission of radiation, that's what laser stands for. Maser's the same thing, but with microwaves. And you're all familiar with the power of microwaves from your microwave oven. Imagine if that microwave is focused in a very narrow beam. It can create cuts. And ball lightning is related to maser cavitation. And cavitation, by the way, through sound. Sound waves can create ball lightning too. There's a whole line of research about acoustic cavitation, mostly again from Russian researchers, but also somewhat in some in the US too. There was a presentation in Boulder a few years ago at the Breakthrough Energy Movement from Mark Leclerc about using cavitation to create nucleonic transmutation and ball lightning and so forth. In any case, here's what's interesting about the Air Force ball lightning studies. I mean, they start telling us what these EVs can do. He talks about Ken Shoulders, he talks about Winston Bostick, so we can see a line of research. This is, unfortunately, is in DoD research. It's not being taught in universities. But we see a line of research from Winston Bostick, from Tesla to Winston Bostick, to Ken Shoulders, John Hutchinson in Canada, who created the fractured metal samples, not with heat, but through magnetism. And here, Eric Davis is telling us that it can create micro ball lightning that can bore through and destroy solid materials. If it can bore through and destroy solid materials, it could do it with animals and human bodies too, biological materials. Point sources of X-rays, again, why you can find radioactivity around where ball lightning has been, which is why predators and other animals would probably avoid it. Just one idea. Self-contained balls of high density charge. Now here's where they go with it, because it's AFRL at Wright-Pat, and they want to weaponize things, right? Which is why we wouldn't hear about it again. I'm just saying this is why aren't we hearing about this? Because it relates to weapons defense technology, aerospace propulsion, and power. This is where this all goes, into national security and defense, which puts it into stovepiped special access programs, when we never hear about it again, unless you have clearance. And here's some just research that it can relate to microwaves. This is right in the AFRL report. Microwaves, fireballs, and so forth. And Kapitsa was a Russian researcher that Paul Dirac, the physicist who eventually moved to Florida, was a friend of Kapitsa. Paul Dirac was one of the first to suggest the existence of antimatter, antiparticles, positrons, before anyone thought this could be real. Real antimatter, literal antimatter to our matter. Dirac suggests this in 29, even before the particles are discovered. They're discovered a few years later in cosmic background radiation. He knew Kapitsa, and Kapitsa was one of the original ball lightning researchers from Russia. It's kind of an interesting continuity here. These are masers. They can be at huge atmospheric levels. This is a maser at the pole of Jupiter. So they're naturally forming, and they can be triggered by ball lightning. And at the micro scale, they can cut through metal. This is Bob Greenier's research with Omaza gas, Omaza being a researcher in Japan, and they could cut a 10 yen coin with a lab-produced maser electromagnetic beam. So if it can cut through metal, it can cut through bone. I'm just suggesting, I'm not saying I know for sure this is happening. I just want to broaden the conversation a little bit here to realize that natural sources like this, natural energies, can cut straight lines. You don't need a human there with a laser. You don't need satanic cults with lasers or ETs to do this, okay? And here's the article from Nature Magazine 2012 where they start developing masers just a couple of years ago. I mean, this is when it becomes public, okay? But here's what I want to show you before we end here. This is the rest of the Air Force report. It's all redacted. Nothing. You guys go and get this Air Force report on ball lightning. You're reading through it, and it's starting to get interesting. And how do we recreate it? All of a sudden, you could even see in the beginning slide, do you see this right here? Do you start seeing the redactions? They won't tell us what some of the uses were from an Air Force program in the 50s and 60s. We're already getting an information vacuum. This is one of the issues we're facing here in the US. We got to do something about this. Do we really need to classify something from the 50s right now? I mean, shouldn't this be part of our discussion of what sort of reality we're living in? No, it's still classified even now. This is some aerospace propulsion program, and if you look up what B310 US Code 130 is, it has to do with protection of critical national security infrastructure. And so here's where we're at. Blank sheets of paper. This is what we're getting. And this is why we're all here and figuring this out one by one and talking to each other, because someone at DoD doesn't want us figuring this out. They feel that their use of it for military applications and propulsion is more important than public knowledge. And I disagree with that. And a lot of people disagree with this. And this is why we're having congressional hearings right now about UFOs, and there have been hearings after hearings, I'm told, since 2017, with witnesses to these programs, to these craft. We're going to hear more about this, guaranteed, because you've heard some of our senators proposing amendments to these national defense authorization acts that Congress has to pass every year to fund the Pentagon, and they're adding things in about banning special access programs related to UFOs, disclosure to Senate intelligence committees. Well, you can see these topics are all related, because if we're looking at ball lightning and about a third of it is just white it out, and the government says, no, we can't share this information. Well, this gets me wondering here, are some of these animal mutilations military experiments with masers? I don't know. We don't know because they're not sharing all information. We can't rule that out either. But here's one or two last slides to show you. There are ways of controlling ball lightning from a distance. And I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, but this is Lockheed Martin's patent in coherent matter wave beam technology. It's a whole patent from a few years ago where they talk about all the technical applications of coherent matter, ball lightning, Bose-Einstein condensates, and they say we can reproduce this at room temperature, and the patent is all about how this could be used for remote control, remote influencing, teleportation, and directed energy weapons. So here we are, just interested in these lights, earth lights, and so forth. And of course, aerospace companies want to find a way to weaponize it. They would say, well, we want to weaponize it before our adversaries do. I mean, it's a big discussion. But in any case, you can see some of the pictures here about creating these coherent particles at the same frequency, at the same temperature. That's ball lightning. That's David Freiberger's electromagnetic toroidal vortex right there. And already ways of controlling it through something. We'll talk about this another time. The Aronhoff-Bohm effect, discovered in the 50s, how even in the absence of electromagnetic signals, just through frequency, you can remotely control weather and other objects and so forth. Now, just one last slide here about your area. Just going through V.L. Bitchkov's book about ball lightning, he talks about soils that are favorable to the creation of ball lightning. And what type of soils are most favorable to ball lightning? Sandy soils. Because silicon dioxide, sand, plus, and you can see, read along with me, 2 carbons equals silicon and 2 carbon monoxides. So, and what do the silicon vapors do? They can start condensing. They can be open to influence by sound, cavitation, and so forth. So even right here in a book about ball lightning, they're talking about sandy soils being favorable to the creation of ball lightning. So this is just a little more evidence. And a few years ago, I talked to someone who had been in the Great Sand Dunes, and they had seen something like a ball lightning just coming right out of the sand. They didn't know what they're looking at. So in conclusion, I think we do need to look at ball lightning in relationship to animal deaths, just because what we know about ball lightning, about the speed, ability to boil liquids, create laser-like cuts, and instantaneous injury, death, and radiation. Strange tracks and markings in the soil seem related to what we find around some of the unexplainable animal deaths. So this just needs to be introduced into the conversation in addition to other possible sources like structured craft and interdimensionals or extraterrestrials or other possible causes that people have introduced. So thanks for listening. That's my presentation. Any questions? Any ideas? I'm open to your ideas, and thanks again.
Are we live?